To whom should I tell my grief? The twilight of evening. Big flakes of white snow are whirling lazily about the street lamps, which have just been lighted, and lying in a thin soft layer of roofs, horses' backs, shoulders, caps. Iona Potapov, the sledge-driver, is all white like a ghost. He sits on the box without stirring, bent as double as the living body can be bent. If a regular snowfall fell on him, it seems as though even then he would not think it necessary to shake it off. His little mare is white and motionless too. Her stillness, the angularity of her lines, the stick-like straightness of her legs, make her look like a halfpenny gingerbread horse. She is probably lost in thought. Anyone who has been torn away from the plough, from the familiar grey landscapes, and cast into this slough, full of monstrous lights, of unceasing uproar and hurrying people, is bound to think. It is a long time since Iona and his nag have budged. They came out of the yard before dinner-time, and not a single fare yet. But now the shades of evening are falling on the town. The pale light of the street lamps changes to a vivid color, and the bustle of the streets grows noisier. "Sledge to Vyborgskaya," Iona hears. "Sledge!" Iona starts, and through his snow-plastered eyelashes sees an officer in a military overcoat, with a hood over his head. "To Vyborgskaya," repeats the officer. "Are you asleep? To Vyborgskaya." In token of assent, Iona gives a tug at the reins, which sends cakes of snow flying from the horse's back and shoulders. The officer gets into the sledge. The sledge-driver clicks to the horse, cranes his neck like a swan, rises in his seat, and more from habit than necessity brandishes his whip. The mare crags her neck too, crooks her stick-like legs, and hesitatingly sets off. "Where are you shoving, you devil?" Iona immediately hears shouts from the dark mass shifting to and fro before him. "Where the devil are you going? Keep to the right. You don't know how to drive. Keep to the right," says the officer angrily. A coachman driving a carriage swears at him. A pedestrian crossing the road and brushing the horse's nose with his shoulder looks at him angrily and shakes the snow off his sleeve. Iona fidgets on the box as though he were sitting on thorns, jerks his elbows, and turns his eyes about, like one possessed, as though he did not know where he was or why he was there. "What rascals they all are," says the officer jocosely. "They are simply doing their best to run up against you or fall under the horse's feet. They must be doing it on purpose." Iona looks at his fare and moves his lips. Apparently he means to say something, but nothing comes but a sniff. "What?" inquires the officer. Iona gives a wry smile, and straining his throat, brings out huskily, My son died this week, sir." What did he die of?" Iona turns his whole body round to his fare and says, "Who can tell? It must have been from fever. He lay 3 days in the hospital, and then he died. God's will." "Turn round, you devil!" comes out of the darkness. "Have you gone cracked, you old dog? Look where you are going." Drive on, says the officer. "We shan't get there till tomorrow going on like this. Hurry up!" The sledge-driver cranes his neck again, rises in his seat, and with heavy grace swings his whip. Several times he looks round at the officer, but the latter keeps his eyes shut, and is apparently disinclined to listen. Putting his fare down at Vyborgskaya, Iona stops by a restaurant, and again sits huddled up on the box. Again the wet snow paints him and his horse white. 1 hour passes, and then another. 3 young men, 2 tall and thin, 1 short and hunchbacked, come up, railing at each other and loudly stamping on the pavement with their galoshes. "Cabby, to the police bridge," the hunchback cries in a cracked voice. "The 3 of us. 20 kopecks." Iona tugs at the reins and clicks to his horse. 20 kopecks is not a fair price, but he has no thoughts for that. Whether it is a rouble or whether it is 5 kopecks does not matter to him now, so long as he has a fare. The 3 young men, shoving each other and using bad language, go up to the sledge, and all 3 try to sit down at once. The question remains to be settled. Which are to sit down, and which one is to stand? After long altercation, ill temper, and abuse, they come to the conclusion that the hunchback must stand, because he is the shortest. "Well, drive on," says the hunchback in his cracked voice, settling himself and breathing down Iona's neck. "Cut along. What a cap you've got, my friend. You shouldn't find a worse one in all Petersburg." laughs Iona. "It's nothing to boast of." "Well, then, nothing to boast of. Drive on. Are you going to drive like this all the way, eh? Shall I give you one in the neck?" "My head aches," says one of the tall ones. "At the Dukmasovs yesterday, Vaska and I drank 4 bottles of brandy between us." "I can't make out why you talk such stuff," says the other tall one angrily. "You lie like a brute." "Strike me dead, it's the truth." "It's about as true that a louse coughs." grins Iona. "Merry gentlemen." "Tfu, the devil take you!" cries the hunchback indignantly. "Will you get on, you old plague, or won't you? Is that the way to drive? Give her one with the whip. Hang it all, give it her well." Iona feels behind his back the jolting person and quivering voice of the hunchback. He hears abuse addressed to him, and the feeling of loneliness begins, little by little, to be less heavy on his heart. The hunchback swears at him till he chokes over some elaborately whimsical string of epithets, and is overpowered by his cough. His tall companions begins talking of a certain Nadyezhda Petrovna. Iona looks round at them. Waiting until there is a brief pause, he looks round once again and says, "This week, my son died." "We shall all die," says the hunchback with a sigh, wiping his lips after coughing. "Come, drive on, drive on. My friends, I simply cannot stand crawling like this. When will he get us there?" "Well, you give him a little encouragement." "One in the neck." "Do you hear, old plague? I'll make you start. If one stands on ceremony with fellows like you, one may as well walk. Do you hear, you old dragon? Or don't you care a hag what we say?" Iona hears rather than feels a slap at the back of his neck. "He, he!" he laughs. "Merry gentlemen, God give you health." "Cabman, are you married?" asks one of the tall ones. "I? Merry gentlemen, the only wife for me now is the damp earth. Hey ho ho! The grave, that is. Here's my dead son, and I am alive. It's a strange thing. Death has come in at the wrong door. Instead of coming for me, it went for my son." Iona turns round to tell them how his son died. But at that point the hunchback gives a faint sigh and announces that, thank God, they have arrived at last. After taking his 20 kopecks, Iona gazes for a long while after the revellers. who disappear into a dark entry. Again he is alone, and again there is silence for him. The misery which has been for a brief space erased comes back again, and tears his heart more cruelly than ever. With a look of anxiety and suffering, Iona's eyes stray restlessly among the crowds moving to and fro on both sides of the street. Can he not find among those thousands someone who will listen to him? But the crowds flit by, heedless of him and his misery. His misery is immense, beyond all bounds. If Iona's heart were to burst and his misery to flow out, it would flood the whole world, it seems. But yet it has not seen. It has found a hiding place in such an insignificant shell that one could not have found it with a candle by daylight. Iona sees a house porter with a parcel and makes up his mind to address him. "What time will it be, friend?" he asks. "Going on for 10. Why have you stopped here? Drive on." Iona drives a few paces away, bends himself double, and gives himself up to misery. He feels it is no good to appeal to people. But before 5 minutes have passed he draws himself up, shakes his head as though he feels a sharp pain, and tugs at the reins. He can bear it no longer. Back to the yard, he thinks. To the yard. And this little mare, as though she knew his thoughts, falls to trotting. An hour and a half later Iona is sitting by a big dirty stove. On the stove, on the floor, and on the benches are people snoring. The air is full of smells and stuffiness. Iona looks at the sleeping figures, scratches himself, and regrets that he has come home so early. "I have not earned enough to pay for the oats even," he thinks. "That's why I am so miserable. A man who knows how to do his work, who has had enough to eat, and whose horse has had enough to eat, is always at ease." In one of the corners a young cabman gets up, clears his throat sleepily, and makes for the water bucket. "Want a drink?" Iona asks him. "Seems so." "May it do you good. But my son is dead, mate. Do you hear? A week in the hospital. It's a queer business." Iona looks to see the effect produced by his words, but he sees nothing. The young man has covered his head over, and is already asleep. The old man sighs and scratches himself. Just as the young man had been thirsty for water, he thirsts for speech. His son will soon have been dead a week, and he has not really talked to anybody yet. He wants to talk of it properly, with deliberation. He wants to tell how his son was taken.
The Magic Shop by H.G. Wells. I had seen the magic shop from afar several times. I had passed it once or twice. A shop window of alluring little objects, magic balls, magic hens, wonderful cones, ventriloquist dolls, the material of the basket trick, packs of cards that looked all right, and all that sort of thing. But never had I thought of going in until one day, almost without warning, Gip hauled me by my finger right up to the window, and so conducted himself that there was nothing for it but to take him in. I had not thought the place was there, to tell the truth. A modest-sized frontage in Regent Street, between the picture shop and the place where the chicks run about, just out of patent incubators. But there it was, sure enough. I'd fancied it was down nearer the circus, or round the corner in Oxford Street, or even in Holborn. Always over the way, and a little inaccessible it had been, with something of the mirage in its position. But here it was now, quite indisputably, and the fat end of Gip's pointing finger made a noise upon the glass. "If I was rich," said Gip, dabbing a finger at the disappearing egg, "I'd buy myself that, and that," which was the crying baby, very human, "and that," which was a mystery, and called, so a neat card asserted, "Buy one and astonish your friends." "Anything," said Gip, "will disappear under one of those cones. I've read about it in a book. And there, Dada, is the vanishing halfpenny. Only they've put it this way up so's we can't see how it's done." Gip, dear boy, inherits his mother's breeding, and he did not propose to enter the shop or worry in any way. Only, quite unconsciously, he lugged my finger doorward, and he made his interest clear. "That," he said, and pointed to the magic bottle. "If you had that," I said, at which promising inquiry he looked up with a sudden radiance. "I could show it to Jessie," he said, thoughtful as ever of others. "It's less than 100 days to your birthday, Gibbles," I said, and laid my hand on the door handle. Gip made no answer, but his grip tightened on my finger, and so we came into the shop. It was no common shop, this. It was a magic shop, and all the prancing precedence Gip would have taken in the matter of mere toys was wanting. He left the burden of the conversation to me. It was a little, narrow shop, not very well lit, and the doorbell pinged again with a plaintive note as we closed it behind us. For a moment or so, we were alone and could glance about us. There was a tiger in papier-mâché on the glass case that covered the low counter, a grave, kind-eyed tiger that waggled his head in a methodical manner. There were several crystal spheres, a china hand holding magic cards, a stock of magic fish bowls in various sizes, and an immodest magic hat that shamelessly displayed its springs. On the floor were magic mirrors, one to draw you out long and thin, one to swell your head and vanish your legs, and one to make you short and fat, like a draft. And while we were laughing at these, the shopman, as I suppose, came in. At any rate, there he was behind the counter, a curious, sallow, dark man, with one ear larger than the other, and a chin like the toe cap of a boot. "What can we have the pleasure?" he said, spreading his long magic fingers on the glass case, and so, with a start, we were aware of him. "I want," I said, "to buy my little boy a few simple tricks." "Legerdemain?" he asked. "Mechanical? Domestic?" "Anything amusing?" said I. Said the shopman, and scratched his head for a moment, as if thinking. Then, quite distinctly, he drew from his head a glass ball. "Something in this way," he said, and held it out. The action was unexpected. I had seen the trick done at entertainments endless times before. It's part of the common stock of conjurers, but I had not expected it here. "That's good," I said with a laugh. "Isn't it?" said the shopman. Gip stretched out his disengaged hand to take this object, and found merely a blank palm. "It's in your pocket," said the shopman, and there it was. "How much will that be?" I asked. "We make no charge for glass balls," said the shopman politely. "We get them, He picked one out of his elbow as he spoke. 3. He produced another from the back of his neck and laid it beside its predecessor on the counter. Gip regarded his glass ball sagely, then directed a look of inquiry at the two on the counter, and finally brought his round-eyed scrutiny to the shopman, who smiled. "You may have those too," said the shopman. "And if you don't mind, one from my mouth. So." Gip counselled me mutely for a moment, and then in a profound silence put away the 4 balls, resumed my reassuring finger, and nerved himself for the next event. "We get all our smaller tricks in that way," the shopman remarked. I laughed, in the manner of one who subscribes to a jest. "Instead of going to the wholesale shop?" I said. "Of course, it's cheaper." "In a way," the shopman said, "though we pay in the end, but not so heavily as people suppose. Our larger tricks and our daily provisions and all the other things we want, we get out of that hat. And you know, sir, if you'll excuse me saying it, there isn't a wholesale shop. Not for genuine magic goods, sir. I don't know if you noticed our inscription, the Genuine Magic Shop." He drew a business card from his cheek and handed it to me. "Genuine," he said, with his finger on the word, and added, "There is absolutely no deception, sir." He seemed to be carrying out the joke pretty thoroughly, I thought. He turned to Gip with a smile of remarkable affability. You know, are the right sort of boy." I was surprised at his knowing that, because, in the interests of discipline, we keep it rather a secret, even at home. But Gip received it in unflinching silence, keeping a steadfast eye on him. "It's only the right sort of boy gets through that doorway." And, as if by way of illustration, there came a rattling at the door, and a squeaking little voice could be faintly heard.
"Nya, I want to go in there, Dada. I want to go in there. Nya."
And then the accents of a downtrodden parent urging consolations and propitiations. "It's locked, Edward," he said. "But it isn't," said I. "It is, sir," said the shopman. "Always, for that sort of child." And as he spoke, we had a glimpse of the other youngster, a little white face, pallid from sweet-eating and over-sapid food, and distorted by evil passions, a ruthless little egotist, pawing at the enchanted pain. "It's no good, sir," said the shopman, as I moved, with my natural helpfulness, doorward, and presently the spoilt child was carried off, howling. "How do you manage that?" I said, breathing a little more freely. "Magic," said the shopman, with a careless wave of the hand, and behold, sparks of coloured fire flew out of his fingers and vanished into the shadows of the shop. "You were saying," he said, addressing himself to Gip, "before you came in, that you would like one of our Buy One and Astonish Your Friends boxes." Gip, after a gallant effort, said, "Yes." "It's in your pocket." And leaning over the counter, he really had an extraordinarily long body, this amazing person produced the article in the customary conjurer's manner. "Paper," he said, and took a sheet out of the empty hat with the springs. "String." And behold, his mouth was a string box, from which he drew an unending thread, which, when he had tied his parcel, he bit off, and it seemed to me swallowed the ball of string. And then he lit a candle at the nose of one of the ventriloquist dummies, stuck one of his fingers, which had become sealing wax red, into the flame, and so sealed the parcel. Then there was the disappearing egg," he remarked, and produced one from within my coat breast and packed it, and also the crying baby, very human. I handed each parcel to Gip as it was ready, and he clasped them to his chest. He said very little, but his eyes were eloquent. The clutch of his arms was eloquent. He was the playground of unspeakable emotions. These, you know, were real magics. Then, with a start, I discovered something moving about in my hat, something soft and jumpy. I whipped it off, and a ruffled pigeon, no doubt a Confederate, dropped out and ran on the counter, and went, I fancy, into a cardboard box behind the papier-mâché tiger. "Tut, tut," said the shopman, dexterously relieving me of my headdress. "Careless bird, and, as I live, nesting." He shook my hat, and shook out into his extended hand 2 or 3 eggs, a large marble, a watch, about half a dozen of the inevitable glass balls, and then crumpled, crinkled paper, more and more and more, talking all the time of the way in which people neglect to brush their hats inside as well as out. Politely, of course, but with a certain personal application. "All sorts of things accumulate, sir. Not you, of course, in particular, nearly every customer. Astonishing what they carry about with them." The crumpled paper rose and billowed on the counter, more and more and more, until he was nearly hidden from us, until he was altogether hidden, and still his voice went on and on. "We none of us know what the fair semblance of a human being may conceal, sir. Are we all then no better than brushed exteriors, whited sepulchres?" His voice stopped, exactly like when you hit a neighbour's gramophone with a well-aimed brick. The same instant silence, and the rustle of the paper stopped, and everything was still. "Have you done with my hat?" I said, after an interval. There was no answer. I stared at Gip, and Gip stared at me, and there were our distortions in the magic mirrors, looking very rum and grave and quiet. "I think we'll go now," I said. "Will you tell me how much all this comes to?" "I say," I said, on a rather louder note, "I want the bill. And my hat, please." It might have been a sniff from behind the paper pile. "Let's look behind the counter, Gip," I said. "He's making fun of us." I led Gip round the head-wagging tiger. And what do you think there was behind the counter? No one at all. Only my hat on the floor, and a common conjurer's lop-eared white rabbit, lost in meditation, and looking as stupid and crumpled as only a conjurer's rabbit can do. I resumed my hat, and the rabbit lolloped a lollop or so out of my way.
"Dada,"
said Gip in a guilty whisper. "What is it, Gip?" said I.
"I do like this shop, Dada."
So should I said to myself, if the counter wouldn't suddenly extend itself to shut one off from the door. But I didn't call Gip's attention to that.
"Pussy,"
he said, with a hand out to the rabbit as it came lolloping past us.
"Pussy, do Gip a magic."
And his eyes followed it as it squeezed through a door I'd certainly not remarked a moment before. Then this door opened wider, and the man with one ear larger than the other appeared again. He was smiling still, but his eye met mine with something between amusement and defiance. "You'd like to see our showroom, sir?" he said, with an innocent suavity. Gip tugged my finger forward, and I glanced at the counter and met the shopman's eye again. I was beginning to think the magic just a little too genuine. "We haven't very much time," I said. But somehow, we were inside the showroom before I could finish that. "All goods of the same quality," said the shopman, rubbing his flexible hands together. "And that is the best. Nothing in the place that isn't genuine magic and warranted thoroughly rum. Excuse me, sir." I felt him pull at something that clung to my coat sleeve, and then I saw he held a little wriggling red demon by the tail. The little creature bit and fought and tried to get at his hand, and in a moment he tossed it carelessly behind a counter. No doubt the thing was only an image of twisted India rubber, but for the moment, and his gesture was exactly that of a man who handles some petty, biting bit of vermin. I glanced at Gip, but Gip was looking at a magic rocking horse. I was glad he hadn't seen the thing. "I say," I said in an undertone and indicating Gip and the red demon with my eyes. "You haven't many things like that about, have you?" "None of ours. Probably brought it with you," said the shopman, also in an undertone and with a more dazzling smile than ever. "Astonishing what people will carry about with them unawares." And then to Gip, "Do you see anything you fancy here?" There were many things that Gip fancied there. He turned to this astonishing tradesman with mingled confidence and respect.
Is that a magic sword?"
he said. "A magic toy sword. It never bends, breaks, nor cuts the fingers. It renders the bearer invincible in battle against anyone under 18. Half a crown to 7 6 according to size. These panoplies on cards are for juvenile knights-errant, and very useful. Shield of safety, sandals of swiftness, helmet of invisibility."
"Oh, Daddy!"
gasped Gip. I tried to find out what they cost, but the shopman did not heed me. He had got Gip now. He'd got him away from my finger. He'd embarked upon the exposition of all his confounded stock, and nothing was going to stop him. Presently, I saw with a qualm of distrust, and something very like jealousy, that Gip had hold of this person's finger, as usually he has hold of mine. No doubt the fellow was interesting, I thought, and had an interestingly faked lot of stuff. Really good faked stuff. Still. I wandered after them, saying very little, but keeping an eye on this prestidigital fellow. After all, Gip was enjoying it. And no doubt, when the time came to go, we should be able to go quite easily. It was a long, rambling place, that showroom, a gallery broken up by stands and stalls and pillars, with archways leading off to other departments in which the queerest-looking assistants loafed and stared at one, and with perplexing mirrors and curtains. So perplexing indeed were these that I was presently unable to make out the door by which we had come. The shopman showed Gip magic trains that ran without steam or clockwork, just as he set the signals, and then some very, very valuable boxes of soldiers that all came alive directly you took off the lid and said. I myself haven't a very quick ear, and it was a tongue-twisting sound, but Gip, he has his mother's ear, got it in no time. "Bravo!" said the shopman, putting the men back into the box unceremoniously and handing it to Gip. "Now," said the shopman, and in a moment Gip had made them all alive again. "You'll take that box?" asked the shopman. "We'll take that box," said I, "unless you charge its full value, in which case it would need a trust magnate." "Dear heart, no." And the shopman swept the little men back again, shut the lid, waved the box in the air, and there it was, in brown paper, tied up, and with Gip's full name and address on the paper. The shopman laughed at my amazement. "This is the genuine magic," he said. "The real thing." "It's a little too genuine for my taste," I said again. After that, he fell to showing Gip tricks. Odd tricks, and still odder the way they were done. He explained them. He turned them inside out, and there was the dear little chap nodding his busy bit of a head in the sagest manner. I did not attend as well as I might. "Hey presto," said the magic shopman, and then would come the clear, small, "Hey presto" of the boy. But I was distracted by other things. It was being borne in upon me just how tremendously rum this place was. It was, so to speak, inundated by a sense of rumness. There was something a little rum about the fixtures even, about the ceiling, about the floor, about the casually distributed chairs. I had a queer feeling that whenever I wasn't looking at them straight, they went askew and moved about and played a noiseless puss in the corner behind my back. And the cornice had a serpentine design with masks altogether too expressive for proper plaster. Then, abruptly, my attention was caught by one of the odd-looking assistants. He was some way off, and evidently unaware of my presence. I saw a sort of 3/4 length of him over a pile of toys and through an arch. And you know, he was leaning against a pillar in an idle sort of way, doing the most horrid things with his features. The particular horrid thing he did was with his nose. He did it just as though he was idle and wanted to amuse himself. First of all, it was a short, blobby nose. And then suddenly, he shot it out like a telescope. And then out it flew and became thinner and thinner until it was like a long, red, flexible whip. Like a thing in a nightmare it was. He flourished it about and flung it forth as a fly fisher flings his line. My instant thought was that Gip mustn't see him. I turned about, and there was Gip quite preoccupied with the shopman and thinking no evil. They were whispering together and looking at me. Gip was standing on a little stool, and the shopman was holding a sort of big drum in his hand.
"Hide and seek, Dada,"
cried Gip.
"You're he."
And before I could do anything to prevent it, the shopman had clapped the big drum over him. I saw what was up directly. "Take that off," I cried. "This instant you'll frighten the boy. Take it off." The shopman, with the unequal ears, did so without a word, and held the big cylinder towards me to show its emptiness. And the little stool was vacant. In that instant, my boy had utterly disappeared. You know, perhaps, that sinister something that comes like a hand out of the unseen and grips your heart about. You know it takes your common self away and leaves you tense and deliberate, neither slow nor hasty, neither angry nor afraid. So it was with me. I came up to this grinning shopman and kicked his stool aside. "Stop this folly," I said. "Where is my boy?" "You see," he said, still displaying the drum's interior. "There is no deception." I put out my hand to grip him, and he eluded me by a dexterous movement. I snatched again, and he turned from me and pushed open a door to escape. "Stop," I said, and he laughed, receding. I leapt after him into utter darkness. Thud.
"Lord bless me heart, I didn't see you coming, sir."
I was in Regent Street, and I had collided with a decent-looking working man, and a yard away, perhaps, and looking a little perplexed with himself, was Gip. There was some sort of apology, and then Gip had turned and come to me with a bright little smile, as though for a moment he had missed me. and he was carrying 4 parcels in his arm. He secured immediate possession of my finger. For the second, I was rather at a loss. I stared round to see the door of the magic shop, and behold, it was not there. There was no door, no shop, nothing. Only the common pilaster between the shop where they sell pictures and the window with the chicks. I did the only thing possible in that mental tumult. I walked straight to the curbstone and held up my umbrella for a cab.
"Hansoms,"
said Gip, in a note of culminating exultation. I helped him in, recalled my address with an effort, and got in also. Something unusual proclaimed itself in my tailcoat pocket, and I felt and discovered a glass ball. With a petulant expression, I flung it into the street. Gip said nothing. For a space, neither of us spoke.
"Dada,"
said Gip at last,
"that was a proper shop."
I came round with that to the problem of just how the whole thing had seemed to him. He looked completely undamaged. So far, good. He was neither scared nor unhinged. He was simply tremendously satisfied with the afternoon's entertainment. And there, in his arms, were the 4 parcels. Confound it! What could be in them? I said. Little boys can't go to shops like that every day. He received this with his usual stoicism, and for a moment I was sorry I was his father and not his mother, and so couldn't suddenly there, coram publico, in our hansom, kiss him. After all, I thought, the thing wasn't so very bad. But it was only when we opened the parcels that I really began to be reassured. 3 of them contained boxes of soldiers, quite ordinary lead soldiers, but of so good a quality as to make Gip altogether forget that originally these parcels had been magic tricks of the only genuine sort. And the 4th contained a kitten, a little living white kitten in excellent health and appetite and temper. I saw this unpacking with a sort of provisional relief. I hung about in the nursery for quite an unconscionable time. That happened 6 months ago, and now I'm beginning to believe it is all right. The kitten had only the magic natural to all kittens, and the soldiers seem as steady a company as any colonel could desire. And Gip. The intelligent parent will understand that I have to go cautiously with Gip. But I went so far as this one day. I said, "How would you like your soldiers to come alive, Gip, and march about by themselves?"
"Mine do,"
said Gip.
"I just have to say a word I know before I open the lid."
"Then they march about alone?"
"Oh, quite, Dada. I shouldn't like them if they didn't do that."
I displayed no unbecoming surprise, and since then I've taken occasion to drop in upon him once or twice, unannounced, when the soldiers were about. But so far, I've never discovered them performing in anything like a magical manner. It's so difficult to tell. There's also a question of finance. I've an incurable habit of paying bills. I've been up and down Regent Street several times looking for that shop. I'm inclined to think, indeed, that in that matter, honour is satisfied, and that, since Gip's name and address are known to them, I may very well leave it to these people, whoever they may be, to send in their bill in their own time.
It was a dark autumn night. The old banker was walking up and down his study and remembering how, 15 years before, he had given a party one autumn evening. There had been many clever men there, and there had been interesting conversations. Among other things, they had talked of capital punishment. The majority of the guests, among whom were many journalists and intellectual men, disapproved of the death penalty. They considered that form of punishment out of date, immoral, and unsuitable for Christian states. In the opinion of some of them, the death penalty ought to be replaced everywhere by imprisonment for life. "I don't agree with you," said their host, the banker. "I've not tried either the death penalty or imprisonment for life, but if one may judge a priori, the death penalty is more moral and more humane than imprisonment for life. Capital punishment kills a man at once, but lifelong imprisonment kills him slowly. Which executioner is the more humane? He who kills you in a few minutes, or he who drags the life out of you in the course of many years?" "Both are equally immoral," observed one of the guests, "for they both have the same object, to take away life. The state is not God. It has not the right to take away what it cannot restore when it wants to." Among the guests was a young lawyer, a young man of 25. When he was asked his opinion, he said, "The death sentence and the life sentence are equally immoral, but if I had to choose between the death penalty and imprisonment for life, I would certainly choose the second. To live anyhow is better than not at all." A lively discussion arose. The banker, who was younger and more nervous in those days, was suddenly carried away by excitement. He struck the table with his fist and shouted at the young man, "It's not true! I'll bet you 2,000,000 you wouldn't stay in solitary confinement for 5 years. "If you meant that in earnest," said the young man, "I'll take the bet, but I would stay not 5, but 15 years. 15? Done!" cried the banker. "Gentlemen, I stake 2,000,000. "Agreed. You stake your millions and I stake my freedom," said the young man. And this wild, senseless bet was carried out. The banker, spoilt and frivolous with millions beyond his reckoning, was delighted at the bet. At supper he made fun of the young man and said, "Think better of it, young man, while there is still time. To me, 2,000,000 is a trifle, but you are losing 3 or 4 of the best years of your life. I say 3 or 4 because you won't stay longer. Don't forget either, you unhappy man, that voluntary confinement is a great deal harder to bear than compulsory. The thought that you have the right to step out in liberty at any moment will poison your whole existence in prison. I am sorry for you." And now the banker, walking to and fro, remembered all this and asked himself, what was the object of that bet? What is the good of that man's losing 15 years of his life, and my throwing away 2,000,000? Can it prove that the death penalty is better or worse than imprisonment for life? No, no. It was all nonsensical and meaningless. On my part it was the caprice of a pampered man, and on his part simple greed for money. Then he remembered what followed that evening. It was decided that the young man should spend the years of his captivity under the strictest supervision in one of the lodges in the banker's garden. It was agreed that for 15 years he should not be free to cross the threshold of the lodge, to see human beings, to hear the human voice, or to receive letters and newspapers. He was allowed to have a musical instrument and books, and was allowed to write letters, to drink wine, and to smoke. By the terms of the agreement, the only relations he could have with the outer world were by a little window made purposely for that object. He might have anything he wanted, books, music, wine, and so on, in any quantity he desired by writing an order, but could only receive them through the window. The agreement provided for every detail and every trifle that would make his imprisonment strictly solitary, and bound the young man to stay there exactly 15 years, beginning from 12 o'clock of November 14th, 1870, and ending at 12 o'clock November 14th, 1885. The slightest attempt on his part to break the conditions, if only 2 minutes before the end, released the banker from the obligation to pay him the $2 million. For the first year of his confinement, as far as one could judge from his brief notes, the prisoner suffered severely from loneliness and depression. The sounds of the piano could be heard continually day and night from his lodge. He refused wine and tobacco. Wine, he wrote, excites the desires, and desires are the worst foes of the prisoner. And besides, nothing could be more dreary than drinking a good wine and seeing no one. And tobacco spoilt the air of his room. In the first year, the books he had sent for were principally of a light character, novels with a complicated love plot, sensational and fantastic stories, and so on. In the second year, the piano was silent in the lodge, and the prisoner asked only for the classics. In the fifth year, music was audible again, and the prisoner asked for wine. Those who watched him through the window said that all the year he spent doing nothing but eating and drinking and lying on his bed, frequently yawning and angrily talking to himself. He did not read books. Sometimes at night he would sit down to write. He would spend hours writing, and in the morning tear up all that he had written. More than once he could be heard crying. In the second half of the sixth year, the prisoner began zealously studying languages, philosophy, and history. He threw himself eagerly into those studies, so much so that the banker had enough to do to get him the books he ordered. In the course of 4 years, some 600 volumes were procured at his request. It was during this period that the banker received the following letter from his prisoner. My dear jailer, I write you these lines in 6 languages. Show them to people who know the languages. Let them read them. If they find not one mistake, I implore you to fire a shot in the garden. That shot will show me that my efforts had not been thrown away. The geniuses of all ages and of all lands speak different languages, but the same flame burns in them all. Oh, if you only knew what unearthly happiness my soul feels now from being able to understand them. The prisoner's desire was fulfilled. The banker ordered 2 shots to be fired in the garden. Then, after the 10th year, the prisoner sat immovably at the table and read nothing but the gospel. It seemed strange to the banker that a man who in 4 years had mastered 600 learned volumes should waste nearly a year over one thin book, easy of comprehension. Theology and the histories of religion followed the Gospels. In the last 2 years of his confinement, the prisoner read an immense quantity of books quite indiscriminately. At one time he was busy with the natural sciences. Then he would ask for Byron or Shakespeare. There were notes in which he demanded at the same time books on chemistry, and a manual of medicine, and a novel, and some treatise on philosophy or theology. His reading suggested a man swimming in the sea among the wreckage of his ship, and trying to save his life by greedily clutching first at one spar, and then at another. The old banker remembered at this and thought, Tomorrow at 12 o'clock he will regain his freedom. By our agreement, I ought to pay him $2 million. If I do pay him, it is all over with me. I shall be utterly ruined. 15 years before, his millions had been beyond his reckoning. Now he was afraid to ask himself which were greater, his debts or his assets. Desperate gambling on the stock exchange, wild speculation, and the excitability which he could not get over, even in advancing years, had by degrees led to the decline of his fortune, and the proud, fearless, self-confident millionaire had become a banker of middling rank, trembling at every rise and fall in his investments. "Cursed bet," muttered the old man, clutching his head in despair. "Why didn't the man die? He is only 40 now. He will take my last penny from me. He will marry, will enjoy life, will gamble on the exchange, while I shall look at him with envy like a beggar, and hear from him every day the same sentence. I am indebted to you for the happiness of my life. Let me help you. No, it is too much. The one means of being saved from bankruptcy and disgrace is the death of that man. It struck 3 o'clock. The banker listened. Everyone was asleep in the house, and nothing could be heard outside but the rustling of chilled trees. Trying to make no noise, he took from a fireproof safe the key of his door, which had not been opened for 15 years, put on his overcoat, and went outside of the house. It was dark and cold in the garden. Rain was falling. A damp, cutting wind was racing about the garden, howling and giving the trees no rest. The banker strained his eyes, but could see neither the earth nor the white statues, nor the lodge, nor the trees. Going to the spot where the lodge stood, he twice called the watchman. No answer followed. Evidently the watchman had sought shelter from the weather, and was now asleep somewhere either in the kitchen or in the greenhouse. If I had the pluck to carry out my intention, thought the old man, suspicion would fall first upon the watchman. He felt in the darkness for the steps in the door, and went into the entry of the lodge. Then he groped his way into a little passage and lighted a match. There was not a soul there. There was a bedstead with no bedding on it, and in the corner there was a dark cast-iron stove. The seals on the door leading to the prisoner's rooms were intact. When the match went out, the old man, trembling with emotion, peeped through the little window. A candle was burning dimly in the prisoner's room. He was sitting at the table. Nothing could be seen but his back, the hair on his head, and his hands. Open books were lying on the table, on the 2 easy chairs, and on the carpet near the table. 5 minutes passed, and the prisoner did not once stir. 15 years' imprisonment had taught him to sit still. The banker tapped at the window with his finger, and the prisoner made no movement whatsoever in response. Then the banker cautiously broke the seals off the door and put the key in the keyhole. The rusty lock gave a grating sound, and the door creaked. The banker expected to hear at once footsteps and a cry of astonishment, but 3 minutes passed, and it was quiet as ever in the room. He made up his mind to go in. At the table, a man unlike ordinary people was sitting motionless. He was a skeleton with the skin drawn tight over his bones, with long curls like a woman's and a shaggy beard. His face was yellow with an earthly tint in it. His cheeks were hollow, his back long and narrow, and the hand on which his shaggy head was propped was so thin and delicate that it was dreadful to look at it. His hair was already streaked with silver, and seeing his emaciated, aged-looking face, no one would have believed that he was only 40. He was asleep. In front of his bowed head there lay on the table a sheet of paper, on which there was something written in fine handwriting. Poor creature, thought the banker. He is asleep and most likely dreaming of the millions, and I have only to take this half-dead man, throw him on the bed, stifle him a little with a pillow, and the most conscientious expert would find no sign of a violent death. But let us first read what he has written here. The banker took the page from the table and read as follows. Tomorrow at 12 o'clock, I regain my freedom and the right to associate with other men. But before I leave this room and see the sunshine, I think it necessary to say a few words to you. With a clear conscience I tell you, as before God who beholds me, that I despise freedom and life and health and all that in your books is called the good things of the world. For 15 years I have been intently studying earthly life. It is true that I have not seen the earth nor men, but in your books I have drunk fragrant wine. I have sung songs. I have hunted stags and wild boars in the forests, have loved women, beauties as ethereal as clouds, created by the magic of your poets and geniuses, have visited me at night, and have whispered in my ears wonderful tales that have set my brain in a whirl. In your books I have climbed to the peaks of Elburz and Mont Blanc, and from there I have seen the sun rise and have watched it at evening flood the sky, the ocean, and the mountain tops with gold and crimson. I have watched from there and lightning flash over my head and cleaving the storm clouds. I have seen green forests, fields, rivers, lakes, towns. I have heard the singing of the sirens and the strains of the shepherd's pipes. I have touched the wings of comely devils who flew down to converse with me of God. In your books I have flung myself into the bottomless pit, performed miracles, slain, burned towns, preached new religions, conquered whole kingdoms. Your books have given me wisdom. All that the unresting thought of man has created in the ages is compressed into a small compass in my brain. I know that I am wiser than all of you, and I despise your books. I despise wisdom and the blessings of this world. It is all worthless, fleeting, illusory, and deceptive like a mirage. You may be proud, wise, and fine, but death will wipe you off the face of the earth as though you were no more than mice burrowing under the floor, and your posterity, your history, your immortal geniuses will burn or freeze together with the earthly globe. You have lost your reason and taken the wrong path. You have taken lies for truth and hideousness for beauty. You would marvel if, owning to strange events of some sort, frogs and lizards suddenly grew on apple and orange trees instead of fruit, or if roses began to smell like a sweating horse. So I marvel at you, who exchange heaven for earth. I don't want to understand you. To prove you in action how I despise all that you live by, I renounce the 2 million of which I once dreamed of, as paradise, and which now I despise. To deprive myself of the right to the money, I shall go out from here 5 hours before the time fixed, and so break the compact. When the banker had read this, he laid the page on the table, kissed the strange man on the head, and went out of the lodge, weeping. At no other time, even when he had lost heavily on the stock exchange, had he felt so great a contempt for himself. When he got home, he lay on his bed, but his tears and emotion kept him for hours from sleeping. Next morning, the watchmen ran in with pale faces, and told him they had seen the man who lived in the lodge climb out of the window and into the garden, go to the gate, and disappear. The banker went at once with the servants to the lodge, and made sure of the flight of his prisoner. To avoid arousing unnecessary talk, he took from the table the writing in which the millions were renounced, and when he got home, locked it up in the fireproof safe. The end.
If these stories helped you relax, please subscribe to Sleep Taily's audiobooks. Give us a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us bring more peaceful tallies to you. Sweet dreams.